Hello and welcome to Tim's BMW Repairs and Information. Now if you've got a BMW built after 2004 with an automatic gearbox, watch this, it's quite important, because this little fella may well smash your gearbox to bits. Yes, I've seen so many Mechatronic units damaged by just that seal failing. Now the Mechatronics gearboxes were brought out in about 2004, 2005 and the 650 got it, 6 series, the 7 series got it, and so all the 6-speed gearboxes in BMW cars now had Mechatronics units. And they're fantastic gearboxes as well. They use less petrol because they're much more efficient at changing gear. The extra gear gave better economy. They were very good gearbox and used in so many cars as well. But with all things BMW, they were looked after really well when the car was new. Everything was serviced using lifeguard fluids at BMW. And then the cars went down the food chain a bit, and then the service intervals got extended and the wrong fluids were used instead of the proper BMW coolants, oils, ATF. Then some aftermarket brand was used and things started to go wrong. And I mean, the E64, which I drive, has got such an awful reputation that no one wants to buy them. They always talk about stem seals and the coolant transfer pipe and so many other things, but they're all due to inadequate servicing of all of the car, and it's to be expected. But there are some parts of the car which really do need to be looked after, and we've looked at the engine problems using the correct coolant to save the coolant transfer pipe and the correct oils to save the stem seals and stuff like that before. But the gearbox, we haven't had a really close look at that. Now the problem with the Mechatronics gearbox is that after the extended service period had ended, the gearbox oil and filter have to be changed, otherwise things start going wrong. And the reason for that was that the transmission fluid had a number of compounds in it that looked after plastics and rubbers and silicon and so on. It's just the same situation as the engine and the coolant. And people don't realise, for instance, that coolant in the engine contains lubricants which, if you don't replace the coolant every few years, those lubricants start to be dispersed, and then things like the water pump will start failing. And with the engine oil, they have volatile components, and then if the oil isn't changed with good fully synthetic oil, then things start to go wrong as well. Things such as the stem seals, because the semi-synthetic and fully synthetic oils have compounds in them that look after rubbers, plastics and silicons and so on. Same is true for the ATF in the gearbox. So if the ATF isn't changed after, well, it's around about 100,000 miles that you need to change the ATF. I know they're called sealed for life gearboxes, but BMW's specification for life is around about 100,000 miles. So you need to change the gearbox oil and fluid. But don't forget that fella. That fella is the most important one altogether. Now, when I first looked at buying a 650, I test drove quite a few of them, and there was a fantastic one, this fella here, that I was very close to buying, but on the test drive it had a harsh gear change, and I was fed up of harsh gear changes, having just got rid of my E38, and those gearboxes, they do tend to have harsh gear changes after a few 100,000 miles. So I really didn't want a 650i with harsh gear changes. So I passed it by, and the same was true for the next few that I test drove as well. Eventually I got to this one, and that had great gear changes and no problems at all. And my friend, more or less at the same time, he got a 650 as well, and he started complaining that he was getting harsh gear changes, and so he did all the things I should have done, which was change the oil and the filter, reset adaptations and so on. And I eventually reset the adaptations. That made a difference. My car felt a lot smoother. But after a while, those gear changes started getting pretty harsh. Now, the amount of energy that's put through a gearbox, through the clutch packs, during harsh gear changes is enormous. I mean, the real thump as it goes into gear, you can just imagine the amount of force going through. And those sort of forces can damage the clutch packs, not only due to the friction, but the actual torque and twist put on those clutch packs can actually destroy them, and it's a catastrophic failure. It goes bang, you lose drive, and that's the end of it. And you'll see in the forums there are so many posts about this happening. Everything's fine one day, well, apart from the harsh gear changes. The next day you can't go anywhere because it won't go into drive. And what's happened is one of the clutch packs has failed. Now, the Mechatronics unit is pretty similar to the valve body in the 5 HP gearboxes. Let's see if we can find some pictures of it. There we go, there's the Mechatronics unit, and in this picture here we've got the Mechatronics unit is in pink, and there's a seal which goes between the Mechatronics unit and the rest of the gearbox, and it's right here, this grey seal here. That seal is responsible for transferring the hydraulic power from the Mechatronics unit up into the clutch packs, and if that starts leaking, then you get big problems. And the problem is that if the ATF isn't changed after its lifetime has expired, which is after 100,000 miles, then it will go brittle. And when it goes brittle, unfortunately, it will not perfectly seal between the Mechatronics unit and the body of the gearbox, and it will start leaking pressure. Now, the EGS, the electronic control unit for the gearbox, watches the gear changes and the time it takes to change between gears, and adjusts the solenoid timing and the pressure required for those changes on the fly. Now, the problem is that with a lower pressure, the gear changes start being extended, and so there's a sort of slur between the gears. So it ups the pressure a bit. And unfortunately, when it ups the pressure a bit, it starts leaking even more. And the first, second and third gears generally aren't affected. It's 4th, 5th and 6th which come a cropper. You generally get good gear changes to start with, but as you get off of that slip road onto the motorway or the highway, that change between 4th and 5th is really quite severe, and the one from 5th to 6th is just as bad. And conversely, as you come off the motorway or highway and you start to deaccelerate, there's a huge whack as it changes between 6th and 5th, and damage is being done to the gearbox, which is a good thing that it lets you know, because the old 5 HP gearboxes didn't used to let you know. They just go bang and transfer safe, and that's the end of that. At least the 6 HP Mechatronics gearbox lets you know when things are starting to go wrong. So yes, if we have a leak between this seal and the rest of the gearbox, you start losing pressure. The solenoid timing is changed, the pressure control is changed, there's a pressure regulator on the Mechatronics unit. And damage is going to be done to those clutch packs. The pressure will be increased, but as the seal starts to leak even more, then there isn't enough pressure to hold the clutch packs in the engaged position, and then you start getting slipping, and you'll get back to that slur gear change again. So if there's a period where everything's okay, start getting harsh gear changes, that's the time to change that seal. If you ignore it, then things seem to quieten down again, but you start getting slurred gear changes, so you hear the revs drop and rise as you change gear, and that's the clutch pack starting to slip. And when you give it full beans, then things will slip worse, and you'll get a trans failsafe prog, and it will lock it into 4th or 5th gear. So what is this seal? Well, first of all, you can get them everywhere, and it's not too difficult to change the seal either. When the gearbox oil and filter is being changed, there's a number of screws as shown on this diagram here that come out, and then the Mechatronics unit can be dropped down, and there's a number of seals which can be changed, but it's this Mechatronics seal adapter which is the most important, and it's those seals which cause the problem. They'll go brittle, they may snap and fail, but generally they just sort of shrink a bit and start leaking. And it's imperative that these seals are changed. Not only that, is that changing those seals makes the gearbox feel so much nicer. It really does. It's night and day difference when I had the seals changed at the same time as having the gearbox oil and filter changed. Oh, it was such a relief to lose those harsh gear changes, because you know as it whacks into gear that it's doing damage to those clutch packs and all the drive shafts and things like that as well, intermediate gears. Yep, those harsh gear changes aren't great at all. So if you're going to get a garage to change your fluid and filter, get them to change the Mechatronics seals as well, and ask to see the old ones that they take out just to make sure. If you're doing the work yourself on a lift, then it's no great problem to actually change these seals, and all the information is on Mechatronics, so I'll put the links up for those. You can get the seals just about everywhere. In fact, you can get them from places like eBay, for instance, and look, 20 quid for the most important seal. That is the most important one to change. 20 quid, what, $25? It's nothing, and you can get them from places like Amazon as well. I mean, Amazon that's the full seal kit for 27 quid or $35. That will be the best $35 or 27 quid that you'll ever spend on the big BMWs with the Mechatronics gearbox. In fact, any BMW, the Mechatronics gearbox. That'll be the best money you ever spend. Having that seal changed, having the oil and filter replaced, and your gearbox is going to last forever, for another 100,000 miles. But if you ignore this warning, and I really mean it, if you ignore the harsh gear changes, that, I'm afraid, is the death knell for that Mechatronics gearbox. Once those clutch packs have exploded, you're on a hiding to nothing. There's bits of metal everywhere. They all get in the oil ways. They're tiny little oil ways. The only fix is to find a second-hand gearbox, which isn't too hard these days. So many BMWs have the Mechatronics 6-speed gearboxes. Ubiquitous. They're used everywhere, used in all sorts of different models as well. Anyway, that's your warning for today. Thanks very much for watching. Oh, thanks very much for the comments. I love reading the comments. Spend hours reading them, and I'll reply to them if I can, and when I get the time. Thanks very much for subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Don't forget your Mechatronics seals, very important.